shannon.com/joy. Without further ado, let us welcome for the very first time in the Shannon Joy Show, after relentless pursuit for almost a year, David Martin. He is a businessman, a professor, author, storyteller, inventor, global foresight advisor, father, friend, creator of MCAM, CNBC, the 1Q100 index, and he specializes in putting humanity back into humans in business. He needs no introduction here. Dr. David Martin, welcome to the Shannon Joy Show for the first time. I'm so glad you're here today.
Shannon, I am delighted to be here, and let's hope that this is not just the first. Let's hope it's one of many.
Well, you know me, I love collabs. And when I find guests that I like get my claws into them, and I'm like, okay,
There you go.
you're coming back on, because truth is such a rare commodity today. Bold, courageous, relentless truth, despite pushback. And you are one of those people that has always been known for stark and bold truths. And I thank you for that. So let's get going, eh?
That sounds wonderful, and I have to say I'm deeply grateful. I specifically want to point out at the beginning of the show how much I appreciate the fact that you have held your ground against the tide of kind of the populist movement to suggest that we are somehow over the chasm. We're not. The chasm is still very much before us. And I appreciate the fact that you haven't let up on that, because the fact of the matter is Americans currently are dying because we're still complacent. And I refuse to be silent. I know you refuse to be silent on that. And so thank you for being one of the few remaining voices who is not willing to jump on the bandwagon to suggest that we are somehow in the post ecclesiastical moment of somehow everything's fine, because we're not. We have a lot of mess in front of us, and we've got to work through it.
Yes, the golden era or the golden age is the mantra.
Yeah.
This is what we're seeing. And there is a lack of scrutiny on the powers that be for a variety of reasons. Dr. Martin, give them time. They're playing
Yeah.
12-dimensional chess. They're playing 12-dimensional chess, a lot of reasons. And a lot of this is coming from the medical freedom community. What I've noticed in the past 6 to 8 months, ever since Bobby Kennedy Jr. joined the Trump administration and the creation of the Maha campaign, there has been just a watering down of the movement and the rhetoric.
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous move, because it emboldens them to do more.
Well, so you couldn't have handed me a more perfect baton, because debuting on your show, most people have not come across the document I'm going to make reference to, the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. And for those of you who always wonder, where is it that he comes up with these things? Why does he keep finding these things? How does Dave do these mysterious finding things? The answer is, you mentioned the company I started, MCAM, which I started back in 1998. We did that as a means of looking at the way in which intangible assets, which are the only rights property rights granted by the Constitution. Most people don't even know that, but the only rights granted by the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8 is the right to your creativity, the right to your innovations, the right to your inventions, your copyrights, your what have you. It's the only property right granted to every citizen. And ironically, for 250 years, it's the only right that no bank has ever been able to recognize. And because of that, that's why we started the company. We started the company to make sure every American citizen had the right to use their only constitutional property right as a means to start small businesses, or to start a venture, or to start a group, or to get a bank loan, or whatever else. And that's ironically why we started the business. We started the business, I know this is going to sound very heretical, to actually allow Americans, for the first time since the founding of the country, to actually use the only property right that every citizen is granted. How about that for a crazy idea?
Right.
We did that. We did that in 1998. But to do that, we had to build an underwriting system that allowed us to monitor all kinds of communication and every form of communication, things like government documents, grants,
Mm,
corporate filings, patents, all sorts of things. And because we had the ability to look at literally everything that moved across a border in 168 countries, we got to see a bunch of stuff that we weren't supposed to see.
wow.
And on your show today, we're going to talk about one of the things no one has talked about on any show ever, anywhere, which is kind of a bad thing when you hear what I'm going to read you. And I want to read you the opening line of this and see if it brings back the same chilling feeling that we had when in September 18th of 2019, all of
Mm,
us should have read with chills going through our spine that the World Health Organization, the Wellcome Trust, the Gates Foundation, and NIAID said that they were going to conduct a global experiment on the accidental or intentional release of a lethal respiratory pathogen September 19th, 2019, months before allegedly China patient number one, months before COVID 19. And they told us they were doing it for the purpose of creating, are you ready for this? A universal vaccine that the world would accept by September 2020. And by the way, for those of you who still don't read, that is in the book, The World at Risk, World Health Organization's publication, World at Risk, published September 18th, 2019. And you
wow.
can still download it and read the stated murderous plan
Mm,
in black and white, in this case with highlights in green and purple, but it is in black and white and green and purple on page 8 of the World at Risk document. People still to this day go, Dave, how do you make these accusations? I'm not making an accusation. I'm reading the absolute admission of the criminals. That's
right,
what I'm doing.
right,
By
right.
the way, during, are you ready for this? The Trump administration, which, by the way, one day later, September 19th, 2019, led to him signing the executive order, which was the forerunner for Operation Warp Speed,
That's right.
in which he signed the executive order for universal influenza vaccine, which would include DNA modification. So let's get it clear. The reason why I'm not welcome in this administration and in a lot of the medical freedom movement is because
Mm,
I don't forget things like this. But I'm distracting myself from this. So let's read exactly what is being stated, and then I'm going to tell you who stated it.
okay.
The
I'm scared.
joint inquiry into administration and congressional actions before and during the bioterrorist attacks of July 4th, 2025. Shannon, did you hear what I just read you? This, by the way, should be everybody's national news. The U.S.
Unbelievable.
House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I call this hearing of the joint inquiry to order 9 weeks ago. Some nation or terrorist group, we still don't know who, attacked the nation's capital and other U.S. cities using biological weapons as we celebrated Independence Day 2025. The infectious agent that they used killed 280,000 Americans and infected in at least 400,000 throughout the country in a single day, in addition to 200,000 dead and 800,000 sickened animals. Just stop for 1 second and tell me why this that I'm reading you on your show isn't everybody's news show. Why is it that Shannon Joy is the only place on the planet where anybody is reading this? And why is it that when you go and read who this august group of strategic planners are, you notice that it's none other than Senator Joseph Lieberman, former governor of Pennsylvania and director of Homeland Security Tom Ridge,
Oh
Donna
my word.
Shalala, former Health and Human Services and Congressman, Tom Daschle, former Senate Majority Leader, Frederick Upton, U.S. Congressman, Susan Brooks, U.S. Congresswoman, James Greenwood, U.S. Congresswoman, Margaret Hamburg, Commissioner of Food and Drug Administration, 2009 to 2015. Yona Alexander, the Director of International Terrorism Center. The Bill Koresh, the World Health Organization and the Council of Foreign Relations. Rachel Levinson, the Brennan Center, I. Lewis Libby Cheney's Center for Terrorism Center
Oh
Control,
my word.
Rajesh Rajesh Panjabi, Harvard Global Business, Harvard University, and head of global equity for vaccine distribution. Gerald Parker, the Texas A&M biosecurity expert. George Post, the biodesign expert from Arizona State University, and Tevi Troy, who was George W. Bush's Secretary of Health and Human Services during, that's right, the anthrax campaign. Why is it that those people have the audacity of doing an Event 201 moment?
That's
Because
right.
remember, no different from Event 201.
That's right.
This report not only goes into details on the fact that we are allegedly going to walk through this scenario of a July 4th, 2025 bioterrorism attack, but then goes through the why it's important that Congress now uses that attack to take action to modify the rest of human society.
Oh my word.
Now, now, Shannon, the reason why I'm unpopular is I said COVID never was a public health campaign. So the people whose rice bowls got filled because they made themselves famous under COVID
Mm-hmm.
forget the fact that when Chuck Schumer's office asked me in 2001 to look into anthrax, and when I came to the unfortunate conclusion that the United States Army had purchased 300 million doses of ciprofloxacin in May of 2001 in advance of the September 2001 anthrax attacks, I sat there going, I feel like there's a little bit of a problem. But here's the real problem. The real problem is we have a world of people who say they're about medical freedom. They say they've woken to government waste, fraud, and abuse. They say they've woken to corruption. They say Bobby Kennedy is now HHS secretary and Jay Bhattacharya is now at NIH. And so we've all got all this stuff taken care of. But they're failing to understand that this was, since 1998, a
Right.
criminal racketeering consortium between the Gates Foundation, between the Wellcome Trust, between NIAID,
That's
the
right.
National Institutes for Health, CDC, FDA, and all of their conspiring co-conspirators across the World Health Organization's Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, which is actually the Clayton Act violation since 2011 of our largest antitrust reform in the last century. And for
Mm.
some reason, because I happen to point that out, I'm not welcome at, I don't know, public health and medical freedom and Maha moments, because it turns out, I think accountability still counts.
Well, yes. You get the sense, I get the sense that the gaslighting post event by the members of our own community, people who I stood on sidewalks with and protested and met with and hosted summits with, the elimination of any discussion or scrutiny or holding accountable some of these people is, it's a very bizarre thing, Dr. Martin. It feels strange.
Well, it goes into something that I wish would feel stranger, but the problem is I've now lived this particular set of issues
Mm.
in my estimation, at least, as long, if not longer, than anybody in this movement, because I started calling attention to biological and chemical weapons issues back, are you ready for this? In the late 1980s.
Wow.
I've been doing this nonsense in official capacities,
Mhm.
uncovering all sorts of things that the US government has been involved in, including the 237, and you heard that correctly, 237 documented cases where the United States government since 1955 has exposed US citizens willfully and under authorized actions to biological and chemical weapons 237 times, including gassing subway systems and
Mm.
spraying into the fog over San Francisco. And by the way, all of this absolutely in the public record, 237 instances, and somehow or another we think COVID is the story. But here's the problem. The problem is COVID, just like the anthrax attacks, was the pretext for unconsidered reforms of civil society so that the government could increase its surveillance, it could increase its manipulation, it could increase the cessation of liberty. And
Right.
giant shock, we have seen this happen. Are you ready for this? Since the late 17th century here in the United States. People forget, and I did a speech for IOMT conference this past, I think it was August or September, where I pointed out that ever since the port of Baltimore and the port of Massachusetts in Boston realized that quarantine was the ultimate cessation of civil liberty, because
That's
the minute
right.
you say there's a health problem, you can suspend everybody's liberties. Well, it turns out that we are currently living in a world where the Department of Health and Human Services is the progeny of the quarantine acts of the late 1600s and early 1700s. Most citizens don't even know this.
Right.
The reason why we have Health and Human Services is for the suspension of liberty.
Mm,
So, giant shock when Bobby Kennedy becomes the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Why is Dave Martin not dancing on a field of daisies, singing kumbaya and going, ha ha, the Messiah has come? Well, the reason is because Bobby Kennedy is still not telling the American people, just like everybody else, that in fact, HHS was the reason why we had COVID. HHS was the reason why we had mRNA injected into the arms of millions and millions of unsuspecting people.
right.
HHS was the reason why we had genetic modification of at least two-thirds of our society under an experimental gene therapy that includes an agent known to actually accelerate cancer. Giant shock. Dave Martin's not enthusiastic because if Bobby Kennedy had walked into office on day one and said mRNA is off the shelf forever,
Right.
then I would have gone, okay, he's doing his job. But he didn't do that. As a matter of fact, a few weeks later, he doubled down on mRNA and let the president get out in front of the world and say, we're going to now cure all kinds of diseases with this wonderful collaboration with Palantir and Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison's Oracle, where we're going to somehow make mRNA on demand, where it's almost you roll up to the side of the mRNA shot, you get a little sample of whatever you are, and next thing you know, you're injected. And here's the problem. The problem is people who are missing that point are missing this point. I just read you a document that every American should be reading. Every American should be reading that document. Every American should be going, who the hell are these people who think that they can just sit there and with impunity? I mean, listen to this. 280,000 Americans dead, 400,000 on July 4th, 2025. Wouldn't it be a bummer if that turned out to be true?
Well, and this seems to be the modus operandi of these governments to put together a simulation or
Yeah.
a plan for preparedness. And then 6 months later, it actually happens. So you have to ask yourself, what are they planning for this
Well,
summer?
yeah, and tragically, if you go back and look, right? I mean, this goes back, and most people don't know. I was part of the team that helped set up the Risk Assessment Horizon scanning program in Singapore. Now, you know as well as I do, Shannon, that some of your viewers and a lot of people who like to troll me on every form of social media go, well, I wonder what his motives are, because he works with all these people. Well, it turns out I work around the world to try to actually break the plans of horrible people doing horrible things.
I love
That's what
that.
I do. And it
I
turns
love that.
out that sometimes that means working with, are you ready for this? Some people who are not so attractive, but that's
Right.
okay because that's what you do. And for those of you, by the way, who are holier than thou and who have never, ever, ever worked with somebody who is slightly off color, I'd encourage you to read the book of Nehemiah, because it
Yeah.
turns out in the Bible, in the book of Nehemiah, we have a guy who God put in, that's right, the bodyguard to the worst king on the history of the planet.
Pretty
So
bad.
there's
That's
that
right.
little detail. So freaking read your book before you criticize. But let's take a step back. When we set up the risk assessment horizon scanning program in Singapore, what we were doing was trying to anticipate risks that could come, which would be highly disruptive. What we were not doing, and what the World Economic Forum did with the help of Klaus Schwab and with the help of the name nobody ever talks about, the Australia Davos connection,
Mm.
Michael Rue, who I can guarantee you no one has mentioned on any show ever, because nobody actually knows that he's the guy who floated money to Klaus Schwab to keep WEF going when
No
WEF
way.
was about to go away. But let's not let the details get in the way of these things. What we did not do with risk assessment horizon scanning is we did not contemplate and plan actions that ultimately were going to be executed. What we did was we tried to get in the minds of people
Mm,
and say, what would a nefarious actor do?
right.
And famously, I used to give speeches called the Archduke Ferdinand Bullet Speech. Now,
Okay.
for people not familiar with the First World War, most people don't realize that the First World War is, in many respects, at least kind of apocryphally credited with the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. Now, World War One was going to happen. Archduke
Mm,
Ferdinand in moment was just a catalyst. But the fact of the matter is, using that as a motif, what I did was I looked at the world and I used to, on an annual basis, give lectures about where the Archduke Ferdinand assassination was going to happen around the world. And the reason we did that then is because it was important for us to think about how to get the world aware of things that it wasn't aware of.
right.
When you read the document I just read, Shannon, it's a totally different document. This is a statement of intent.
Yes.
This is a statement of a plan. And how on earth do you think you would ever get away with writing if you were, I don't know, Tom Ridge, the former head of the Department of Homeland Security, who's actually writing a scenario including about close to 1 million people ultimately impacted, 800,000 animals impacted by a terrorist event on July 4th, 2025. Here's my point. My point is we haven't learned anything.
Right.
COVID didn't teach us anything because we're still falling for a broken system where we're looking to the people who we say are in leadership to provide leadership, and we're failing to realize that they are, in fact, as incapacitated as everyone else thinks they are. And it is
Wow.
not until we, the people, stand up and keep our voices heard that we have a chance of changing any of this.
Well, because they'll get everything. I mean, if they succeed, and this is so dastardly that I cannot even function right now, but if they succeed in this and they do try something like this, that type of death toll, that type of fear moment will empower them and give them the justification to create the larger control grid.
Yep.
And as we've been pointing out on the show, I've had lots of financial experts. You're a financial expert too, as well, by the way, talking about the sovereign debt crisis,
Yep.
and the currency crisis, and things are so rapidly evolving out of their control, or into their control. Actually, maybe I should say that you could see something like this playing out. And so knowledge of it is the most important thing. Like, we can't let
Exactly.
this happen. I mean, we have to stop it somehow, and or try to stop it, or at least corral it away from tyranny and back towards liberty into the true perpetrators if they do try something.
Well, what a beautiful point you're making. And I think we need to make sure we focus in on this. I gave briefings many, many, many times. In fact, famously in Iran in 2005, in Tehran, in front of all the Ayatollahs, in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran, I talked about the biological weapons engineering programs of countries all over the world. We published books that actually laid out in great detail what was going on in biological weapons programs in violation of bioweapons conventions around the world. And ironically, places like Egypt, places like Iran,
Mm,
places like India, places like Brazil, parts of Eastern Europe actually appreciated having these programs unveiled.
Right.
And it was actually our government that was most upset that I was allegedly pointing out, how dare you point out that the United States might have biological weapons programs? I don't know. Which part of 237 attacks on US citizens by the
Right.
United States government would make me go, maybe somebody should be paying attention? And to your point, Shannon, the one thing that we have achieved, and this is to your credit, to the credit of Kim, my wife, who put us into the butterfly of the week program that we started at the beginning of COVID, so that people could stay alert and awake and aware of what was going on in a different narrative.
Love that.
Um, the fact of the matter is, the one thing we have as an advantage now is that right now, on average, when I get up and speak, whether it's in public, whether it's on a private forum like this, whether it's on a digital platform in an analog situation, the great news is now we have thousands of people that then turn into tens of thousands of people. And as you know, with my European Union speech, now billions of people
Yep.
who are exposed to information that they didn't otherwise have. So that's the positive. That's the silver lining here.
Mhm.
But the not so silver lining is we still have, to your earlier point, the Maha medical freedom movement that is failing to recognize that until biological weapons are outlawed, period,
Right.
until gain of function is outlawed, period, until forced vaccination is outlawed, period, until any form of mRNA use is outlawed, period,
Right.
until all injection manufacturers are held liable for their products. Until those things happen, we haven't achieved even the first win. That's the problem. That's the first milestone. That's not healthy. That's just not murderous, not tyranny, not terrorism, not racketeering. Our high water mark should be health and vitality and enthusiasm and all kinds of positive things. Our high water mark shouldn't be, well, Pfizer shouldn't be allowed to kill us with impunity.
Right.
Like, that's a horrible thing. And that's still beyond the reach of the current administration to give the American people the right to say that if a company kills you, you should have recourse against that company. And that is a bridge allegedly too far for the Trump and Kennedy administration.
Tell me about the pushback that you're getting from the members of the medical freedom community, because we are seeing some health ranger, Mike Adams, for example,
Yep.
speaking out very loudly on social media. Thankful for him. Mary Talley Bowden has been an absolute rock star. 5 times August has been really great. So there are emerging, we're going to be having some of the members of the Free Thought Project. So we have Jason Bassler coming on this week, and we're talking to Last American Vagabond as well. But there are bastions within the medical freedom community connected, tethered to those names that have been
Yep.
elevated, that continue to distract and disengage and go after voices like mine. What is your experience been? I'm sure they're saying the same things to you. Well, give them time. Well, you can't have everything at once. Like all of these excuses. But has there been a lot of pressure? I mean, have you had some pressure, and is it something that you think we can crack through, or because Maha, some people think that Maha is a psyop, by the way, launched to distract everyone from the shots
Yep.
and the democide. But what are your thoughts on that, and what has that been like for you?
Well, so I upset everybody at some of the early medical freedom events. And these were like Clay Clark's events and then
Right.
several of the CHD events, where I insisted that to be credible, no one should refer to this as a vaccine.
Right.
In April of 2020, both Moderna and Pfizer, in BioNTech's official SEC filings, stated that these injections were experimental gene therapies. And I said
Mm,
that anyone who uses the term vaccine is on the wrong side of history because this is not a vaccine. It never has been. And it turns out that by virtue of stating that, I pissed off tons of people who actually said you're being too technical and too complicated. Well, here's the problem. I'm not being technical and complicated. In the law, there is an absolute standard that says that if you're ultimately going to prosecute a crime, you have to use the construction of the language of the statute. And the statute defines in 1986 a vaccine as an agent that disrupts infection and transmission.
Okay.
These protocols were written specifically not to measure either of those things, which means that in April of 2020, we knew that there was going to be a Federal Trade Commission Act. Remember, Eric Naputi very famously got absolutely drawn over the coals for his work where he was advocating a bunch of therapies early into COVID, and they said that it was, mislabeling and all that kind of stuff. And the Federal Trade Commission made a show trial out of him while paying no attention to the fact that the federal government and every state agency mislabeled a thing which under the SEC was called an experimental gene therapy. Now, here's what I said to Bobby Kennedy in the late part of 2020 going into 2021. If we want to shut this thing down before patient one gets shot number one, what we
Mm,
ought to do is we ought to file a SEC charge for deceptive practices,
right.
deceptive trade practices. Because it turns out that if we filed it with the SEC and if we made it a federal crime, then guess what can't be done? You can't have emergency use protections if there was a felony in the commission of the creation of the emergency. So here's the point. The point is, if we had stopped calling it a vaccine when it never was, and listen, I call it a bioweapon because that's what the architect called it. In 2005, Ralph Barrick said that this was biowarfare enabling technology. That's what
Yep.
he said about it. So,
Yep.
newsflash, the reason why I call it biological weapons is because the guy who made it called it that. That's why I say that. That's not Dave
Mm,
Martin making an allegation. That's Dave Martin quoting the architect. He said it was a bioweapon. I say it's a bioweapon. Now, I'm not saying everybody had to go there, but I am saying that every person who used the term vaccine when it applied to the COVID shot actually participated in the brainwashing and participated in the fallacy that led to the problem we're in. And
right.
this is now the big problem. And by the way, I'm going to give props to somebody I don't usually comment on in a positive way, but I'm going to give props to Peter McCullough because he has been moving considerably in the last several months to being much more outspoken against the lethality of these shots. And I really,
Good.
really commend him for doing that
Good.
because he was one of the people who did not appreciate my insistence on not calling it a vaccine and
Mhm.
got into all kinds of conversations around it. But I will give him a ton of credit. I've criticized him before. I'm going to give him a ton of credit because he is actually doing a great job. You talked about Mary Tyler Bowden,
Yeah.
another phenomenal, phenomenal person. Mike Adams, Brian Artis, a bunch of these people, amazing, amazing people who are doing great things.
Good.
And people who, like Seth Holhouse on the media side,
Yeah.
continue to push and push and push to make sure we don't lose track of this. And I would go as far as to add into this list, even people like Clay Clark, as much as people criticize the tour, what I will say about Clay is he curated a number of voices and he let everybody have a voice on the stage. And I really appreciated the fact that he wanted to do his best to get as many people as seen as possible. Some really, really positive things. So I'm trying to find every place where I can say, if there's a positive thing I can say, I want to say it. But here's the downside of what I'm saying. By selecting one stone upon which I was going to stand, which was the crime was racketeering, which
Yes.
ultimately became murder, and that the deceptive medical practices was the tripwire. Remember, the reason why we made up the BS measles story in Mennonites in Texas was because Bobby failed to realize that the vaccine fight is not the fight. This is a
Mm,
biological weapons fight. It's not a vaccine fight.
Right.
And I am not here advocating or not advocating for anything with respect to medical treatment. But what I am saying is that by painting yourself into the vaccine corner, he gave the enemy the Achilles heel that was going to be used to take him out. And
Yeah.
giant surprise, you pick a population who has no outside contact, which means, by the way, measles can't get to them. So
Mm.
there's that little problem.
Right.
But you pick a theoretical population, you actually use prejudicial, deceptive practices to allege that somehow or another they have a disease that allegedly would be otherwise preventable. And giant surprise. Look at the two populations where they pulled the measles stunt. Are you ready for this? Mennonites and Ashkenazi and Old Order Jewish communities, two
Unbelievable.
of the most insular communities on the planet, where the idea of a transmissible disease is the least likely possible.
Yeah.
And we're going to say that that's where these problems occur. The fact of the matter is, had we made this point correct, which was this was never a vaccine, it was always about a gene therapy, and it
Yes.
was always about a medical countermeasure to deprive people of liberty. That's what it was about. Had we made it the right fight, we wouldn't have had Bobby Kennedy's collapse.
Right. Well, and yes, the original sin or the original lie, like with you, if you build an entire movement on a foundational falsehood,
Yep.
then it's not solid and
Yeah.
it will indeed topple. Makes a lot
Yep.
of sense. We're talking to Dr. David Martin. We do have to take a quick break. Man, are you I don't even need I could just give him the show. You just come on here take I mean, I am but bombshell statement today in Discovery. Is there a plan? Is there a plan in front of sitting members of Congress to attempt some type of event in July of 2025 to give the excuse and the groundwork for the federal government to deploy even more surveillance, the military police state, cover up what they're doing with the economy and our dollar, and move us into a tyranny that would make COVID-19 lockdowns blush at this point. If you thought it was bad in 2020, imagine if they actually do have bodies on the street. That's something they never had during the first scamdemic. It's why they had to go to such extents to censor and to control and to coerce and to manipulate. But are we getting to a point where we have so emboldened them that they are willing to slaughter people in the streets of the United States of America in order to continue this? That is the question we're going to ask Dr. David Martin when we come back here in the Shannon Joy Show. If you have questions, please put them up in the live chat. And Annie, if you could try to rustle up that document that Dr. Martin has referenced, if we can get a link, we do have people in the live chat who are looking for that link. 500 plus live viewers here on Rumble right now, which is amazing. Of course, we're live on Rumble, live on Twitter, Spreely TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, every podcast platform you can ever imagine, reaching millions every single month, which is amazing in this little teeny independent network. But we've been able to do it, wiggle out and do it independently, which has been phenomenal. We're going to come back and continue this conversation with Dr. David Martin. DavidMartin.world is his website, DavidMartin.world. Make sure you support him. Get in the pipeline of the information that he is putting out, because right now we are finding the truth tellers again. We have to do it all over again in 2025, apparently, but we're going to do it here on the Shannon Joy Show. We'll be back in a minute. It is the strangest thing, right? Hydration. Seems simple enough. It's basic hydration, but it is something that I haven't thought about for most of my life. And as a result, I think that I've been borderline dehydrated for most of my adult life. Now, when you're younger, your body might be better able to handle dehydration, but as you age, you notice it more and more. Your body becomes way more susceptible to dehydration, and this can result in a lot of ailments like muscle cramping, bladder problems, fatigue, and also brain fog. So about a year and a half ago, I started adding daily hydration with 2 packets of Native Path Hydrate every single day. And this became part of my morning routine. And guys, I cannot believe the difference. I can't believe that I wasn't hydrating for most of my life. It is a huge and noticeable difference. In fact, when I don't have my native path hydrate in the morning, I can tell, and it's a tougher day. You need to hydrate, people, and now you can for 45% off with a sick deal from our friends over at Native Path Hydrate. Go to nativepathhydrate.com/joy. That's nativepathhydrate.com/joy to learn all about the benefits of hydration and unlock a 45% off deal that is just for the Joy audience. This is the best price point that I have seen anywhere, and this is a workhorse product. It is the best in the market for just basic hydration. I absolutely love it, and you will too. So go to nativepathhydrate.com/joy today to unlock that deal and get started on daily hydration. Hey everyone, Chef's Foundry cookware stacks up to some of the highest quality pots and pans on the market. They can literally stack up too. The P600 Sizzle Set on sale for 55% off for the Joy audience includes way more than just the non-toxic ceramic nonstick cookware. Each pan comes with a removable handle for easy storage and silicone separators for stacking. You'll also get a full supply of ceramic-friendly spoons and spatulas. If you're cooking with non-stick Teflon, you might be poisoning your family, right? PFAs, PFOAs, lead, cadmium, among others. These toxins seep into your food as it heats up and can seriously impact your health. If you haven't started cooking with ceramic, today is the day to make the switch. With 55% off exclusively for the Joy audience and a 60-day money-back guarantee that is rock solid, there's no reason to delay. Go to www.chefsfoundry.com/joy to unlock this amazing deal. That's www.chefsfoundry.com/joy. Start cooking with confidence with Chef's Foundry. Shannon Joy here with an urgent retirement warning. Trade tensions, tariffs, and China's relentless attack on the US dollar have rattled the markets. This is why Warren Buffett just dumped $133 billion in stocks. And so has Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, and even Jamie Dimon, CEO of the world's largest bank. Just recently, Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki warned of a coming market crash. This is why thousands of informed IRA and 401k savers are now shielding their savings with gold. And the experts at Colonial Metals Group are the only folks I trust to help you do the exact same. Visit www.colonialmetalsgroup.com/joy or call 888-705-0950. You'll get a free gold guide on how to bulletproof your wealth with gold tax-free. Plus, see if you qualify for a free home safe and as much as $7,500 in free silver. Once again, that's www.colonialmetalsgroup.com/joy or call 888-705-0950 to protect your wealth today. Welcome back, everyone, to the Shannon Joy Show. Today, we're breaking news here with Dr. David Martin, who has brought to our attention a document and MAV 2022 on the live chat. Thank you for your comment about the context. This was a report that was, I believe, created in April of 2024, predicting in a very Event 201 simulation style a terrible biological attack in the United States of America in July of 2025. Dr. David Martin has found that document. We have linked it into the live chat in the show notes on the Shannon Joy Show. So thank you to Annie for getting that up there. And just a couple comments here, Dr. Martin. We're going to talk about what they're recommending in that scenario, the hypothetical scenario, which we all know. I mean, this is not our first rodeo, okay, Dr. Martin. We know some of their tricks now, but just want to give you some of the comments from the chat. MAV 2022. I'm sorry, Charlotte. David Martin has done such great work. I know most people can't even wrap their minds around what their own government has done to their own people all over the world for so long. Jerry Alatalo says increasingly desperate, dangerous, fascist, eugenicist, mRNA bioweapons mass murderers do increasingly desperate and dangerous things as people begin to wake up and look around. And I agree 100%. Um, in this document, right? So we've achieved nothing. Okay, Maha, so sorry, right? Bobby Kennedy Jr., you gave it the old college try. Doesn't look like you're getting anything done. Marty Makary, Jay Bhattacharya, all towing the lines for pharma. This is why we have hundreds of new mRNA technologies in the hopper as I speak to you today, as pointed out by Dr. Mary Talley Bowden. See, they'll do worse things to us. When you let them get away, if you let a bully knock you over and punch you in the face and you don't stand up for yourself, they're gonna keep doing it, which is why we're in the place that we are today. But so this document, obviously has some protocols or countermeasures. Thank you to our friends Sasha Latipova and Debbie Lerman, who are also continuing to push this. Their Substacks are great. But what does this document, what are they, what can we expect in July of 2025, Dr. David Martin, according to this document that you have uncovered?
Well, remember that the whole point of these is essentially to kind of let us know the audacity of the thinking, if you want to call it thinking. I would
Right.
call it conspiring, because it is actually, once again, using a legal definition, it's conspiring to commit acts of terror. And people in positions of authority are now absolutely convinced that they can, with reckless abandon, imagine a world where you kill 200 and what's our total here? Our total on July 4th, 2025, 280,000 Americans dead during July 4th celebrations. I
Unbelievable.
don't know what level of insanity we have sunk to when we think that it's okay for somebody to just kind of play around with, oh, let's just say 250,000 people just get murdered on a day. And remember, this is without attribution. This is from the same people who sat in the UN and in Congress and lied to us about weapons of mass destruction. These are the same people who lied to us about, we don't know where anthrax came from, despite the fact that in May of 2001, the Army had purchased 300 million doses of the drug for anthrax poisoning, which had never, ever, ever, ever occurred anywhere in human history. So why would we need 300 million doses, a dose for every American, for a drug that had never been used in the history of humanity? Why would we need that? And the answer is, we were going to get the PrEP Act come hell or high water. And the
Right.
PrEP Act was going to give manufacturers of pharmaceuticals absolute immunity for anything they declared as a medical countermeasure. You know, Shannon, I point out to a bunch of people, and once again, some of the medical freedom movement make me sick because they genuinely pretend like they've got their finger on the pulse of things. But let's get really clear. We have an emergency use authorization that is continuing on. Are you ready for this? The opioid epidemic. Now, stop and listen to what I just said. It's been running longer than COVID. You haven't heard anybody in the medical freedom movement talk about it. But don't you think we should be concerned that Moderna has a patent on a vaccine for opioid addiction? A vaccine for opioid addiction. Listen to those words. Isn't it troublesome that if you go to Texas right now, you can actually see in multiple clinical trials in Texas, women enlisted in the armed forces being subjected to breast cancer vaccines? Breast
No.
cancer vaccines, because clearly what we need is a vaccination against breast cancer. This is nonsensical. We are killing the women in our armed forces, and we're doing it, and all under emergency use authorizations with no liability whatsoever. And we're doing it because under uh, 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 50.20 to 23, the president can waive informed consent for any member of the military. So
Oh
guess
my
what?
God.
We are allegedly so with it because we're now welcoming women into the armed forces only to line them up to put them into breast cancer vaccination clinical trials. See, why are you having this response? You're having this response because the medical freedom movement has failed
Mm,
to get the real issue. This has
yeah,
never been about COVID. It has been about biological weapons perpetrated by the United States on the United States for the purpose of suppression of liberty. That's what it is. And we still don't have the right conversation.
right.
So when you hear, are you ready for this? After we have this terror attack, July 4th of 2025, who's going to be responsible for the response? Are you ready? Because this is who you'd expect. Over the next 3 weeks, the joint inquiry will hear from the Secretary of State.
Ugh,
You definitely lead off with Secretary of State when it comes to a health situation. Next, the Secretary of Defense, because clearly we need the Defense Department to cover the fact that they did it again. The Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence. Those are the first four agencies to respond to this hypothetical attack. Now, slow the tape down for a second and just go, okay, what is really going on here? What's really going on is we're finding out where the perpetrators live,
mm,
right? Isn't it a tragedy, but for example, that Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is a very intelligent, very wise, and very thoughtful person, I have a huge amount of appreciation and respect for him. But isn't it a shame that he is now going on the chat circuits and the news circuits to try to force the China virus story when we know that even the Brownstone Institute and others are now coming clean on what I've been saying since 2002, which is this is the United States conducting biological weapons development in the United States.
right.
Collaborating, yes, they are collaborating with foreign actors. But let's be really clear. And Jay Bhattacharya needs to address a very fundamental problem. In February of 2016, the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences unambiguously stated that, and I'm now quoting, the Wuhan Institute of Virology Virus 1, WIV1, was, quote, poised for human emergence. Now, does that sound like a lab leak in Wuhan, or does that
No,
sound like a manufactured weapon in the United States? Built in the United States, developed in the United States during the gain of function moratorium. You've been told to make it an EcoHealth Alliance story. You've been told to make it a China lab leak story. 100% of that is the cover for what it actually is. What it actually is what they themselves said it was. WIV1,
yep.
Wuhan Institute of Virology Virus 1, poised for human emergence. And I am sick and tired of us pretending like there's still a question.
Mhm.
Where did it come from? How did it get released? Nonsense. Stop. Read the admission of the perpetrators, and suddenly it makes sense. But no, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to fall on this nonsensical Ferris wheel of lies where we're supposed to make it into, oh, well, it maybe was a US China collaboration. Maybe it was Peter Daszak. Maybe it was the EcoHealth Alliance. That's all a nonsensical distraction. And it is allowing the people who I just read you on this list. And we've got to, I mean, listen, people sit there going, well, name names. Well, here's the names. Joe Lieberman. How much confidence do you place in Joe Lieberman having the interest of America front and center? How about Tom Ridge,
No.
the governor of Pennsylvania and head of the Department of Homeland Security? Oh, that's right. I mean, the director of the Bush administration's domestic spy program. Did I mention? Oh, a really visionary person like Donna Shalala and Tom Daschle. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is who is architecting your July 4th celebration that includes 240,000 Americans being killed by allegedly an unknown actor. You know what unknown actor is code for?
What?
It's code for we're covering up the fact we did it.
Unbelievable.
I mean,
Unbelievable.
you just sit there and go, you know, the tragedy is I said this 5 years ago when all this nonsense started. I said, watch what happens. People are going to jump. Their reflex is going to trigger. They're going to go, oh, COVID, let's talk COVID. And they're going to be distracted. And all of the energy that went into every bit of the medical freedom movement lost the plot the day they said the word vaccine.
Yeah.
Because the minute that happened, it became a battleground, and that battleground is now the place where ultimately, like Gettysburg, we will see thousands fall for no purpose at all.
What do you imagine these gentlemen say to themselves to justify what they are doing? And I'll mention Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Bobby Kennedy Jr., Marty Macri. I mean, these are intelligent
Yep.
men. They're not doofuses. Okay. Do you think it is naivete? Do you think it is corruption? Do you think, I mean, what would you imagine? I know it's always different, but what would you imagine this? Because they're clearly playing a role. They're clearly
Yep.
injected into these organizations to play a role, to distract. Do they know? Are they witting assets, unwitting assets? Like clearly this is a military operation. Um, what do you think drives that? And then we have about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about what we can do. I want to
Yep.
be like, this is not on my watch, right, Dr. Martin? Like we
Yep.
need to reinvigorate this medical freedom movement, cast Maha off, get rid of the means twins, send them, I don't know, off to Timbuktu and get this movement going because our lives are going to be at stake at this point.
Yep.
But what do you think motivates them to do this? It's terrible.
Well, I like to use an axiom from my grandfather that says never apply or never attribute to malevolence what is ignorance. And and here's what I think. I think a lot of people genuinely think when they're sitting on the outside of federal agencies and appointed positions that they have a lot of power that they can access
Mm,
by virtue of position. One of
right.
the lessons my wife has taught me is power is not a function of your title or your status. Power is a function of your integrity.
Mm,
And I want to say that one more time. It's not a function of status, it's not a function of some externality. It's a function of your integrity. You have as much power as you are willing to hold yourself accountable for.
mm,
And the minute you decide that, oh, if I only get that job or if I only get that post or I only get that nomination, then I will.
right.
Well, the problem is you won't find power from outside anywhere because what it will do is it will be the ring in the Lord of the Rings. It will ultimately corrupt you and it will
Mm,
ultimately take you in every direction other than the place you ought to go. I think, Kennedy, I think Bhattacharya, I think all of these people are actually extremely intelligent and well meaning people. And I think that they made the mistake of thinking that they could get into a position and by fiat change the inertia of a system that they actually had no idea was the actual system.
right.
One of the things I learned in 1998 was who is really running the United States. And it's not people that we put in elected positions. If you think it is, you're delusional. I wrote a whole novel about this. And the fact of the matter is
I'll
that
read that
novel is
novel.
very successful because it actually lays out the 12 shareholders that actually run the country. And that list is a real list. And if people want to read it, they can read it. The fact of
What's
the
the
matter
book?
is,
What's your book?
huh?
What's the
The
novel?
book Coup de 12. And
Ooh,
and if you read it, you're going to find out that there's a force behind the thing you think is the force. But here's the problem. The problem is if any of them had the courage to stand up on day 3 or day 4 and have a press conference and go, guess what, guys?
change your voice.
I'm trying to do the right thing, but let me tell you who's standing in my way.
Yep.
Well, you know what the public would do? The public would applaud the crap out of that.
Right.
But fear has the ultimate counterweight to power. And I don't think, and Shannon, this is just kind of going out on a limb, but I don't think power is possible without fear.
Mm.
So I think what we have to do is we have to go back and examine what the heck are we really about? It's funny that my two interviews in the European Union Parliament have had broader reach than any other digital media anywhere in history. And if you
Wow.
look at both of those two interviews, both of them were meant to fail. Both of them were setups where I was put on last. I was put on to be the closer. The translators had left the building in the second one. They cut off the live stream. And here's the funny thing. People heard a truth coming from
Mm,
a person who simply wanted to convey information. I make this point in the course that Kim and I teach, which is our 12 senses course. It's a
okay.
4.5 day workshop that we do. And next one's coming up in July. But
Okay.
but people talk about the fact that we only use a small fraction, less than 5% of our brain. And I point out in the course that since Aristotle, so that's a long way back. We're willing to go. Aristotle's a long way back. Since Aristotle, we've been told we have five senses. The truth is we have 12.
Wow.
12. And we have 12 senses that are wired directly into our brain. And since
Okay.
Aristotle, we have been told we only have five. Now, giant shock. Is there any wonder that if a allegedly fully functioning human thinks they're fully functioning with the five senses that they think they have, is it
Okay.
possible that missing seven whole senses might impact your ability to perceive the world? And wouldn't it be interesting if you could turn those things back on? Well, the fact of the matter is, over 4.5 days, I go through a laboratory and I turn all 12 senses back on for
Oh
every
my God.
person who's in the workshop. But here's
What?
the thing, the reason why we do that is because I like to show people that once you understand your full capacity,
Mm,
like you fully in your own capacity, you realize all the nuances that used to give you fear and uncertainty and anxiety and everything else melt away because you realize that the system was set up to play on your blindness.
wow.
And if you get rid of your blindness, you can finally enter into a world where all this stuff is visible, seeable, sensible, knowable. And it turns out that when you have that access to reality, you don't get played. So my
Mm,
compassion goes out to people who actually, probably with the best of intentions and with probably the purest of hearts,
right.
wanted to do the right thing and find out when they walk in that there's a note on the desk going, think again, we've got you.
Yeah.
And now the question is, how much courage can they muster to actually speak the truth? Because we've got a real event horizon that's been really identified.
Yes.
And now the question is, are we going to actually tell the truth about which one of the 68 deployment ready weapons that DARPA currently has, 68 of them, which one of those 68 is going to be the surprise terrorist attack on July 4th, 2025? And let me tell you what, my job, and thankfully with this conversation, your viewers' job,
Let's
is
go.
now to make sure that we spoil their plans by getting out in front of this story as much and as fast and as broadly as possible. Because I don't want to see 240,000 people dead on July 4th.
Right.
I don't want that to happen.
Unbelievable, unbelievable talk, Dr. David Martin. And I agree. And I will take up that mission along with you to push this out as much as humanly possible and to get this narrative out there because there is power in the bully pulpit.
Yep.
And that was one of the areas, in talking about Bobby Kennedy Jr. and even Donald Trump. There's so much they could do with
Yes,
a tweet, a statement, if you just give breath and oxygen to the truth, the people will take care of the rest,
exactly right.
and we'll get out there. But it's just so difficult. And I agree. I think that there's a lot of fear and a lot of cowardice. I don't even go to Washington, D.C. I cannot bear to be in Washington, D.C. because my spirit is just, it turns my spirit. I just don't like it. It seems so dark to me there right now. But, this is definitely something that we can do. And, we have run out of time. However, You are absolutely welcome back on this platform. I'd love to have you in on a regular basis and join the repertoire of the other, courageous warriors out there. People like Ed Dowd and Mary Talley Bowden and Catherine Austin Fitz and a bunch of the people that you mentioned as well. So we do have to wrap it up, but if you can just, and by the way, the website, guys, is davidmartin.world, davidmartin.world. You all have the link to this commission's report in the live chat. We're going to start pushing that out. And before I let you go, in the last 60 seconds, what would you recommend we do
Well,
in addition to our voices? Go ahead.
I think the key thing is acknowledge the amazing work that is being done. I mean, you mentioned Ed Dowd.
Mm,
I remember the first time I mentioned the fact that if we had a real epidemic, we should have had excess deaths in 2020. But 2020 was a record year for profits for life insurance companies. So
uh,
mysteriously, somehow or another, that message got lost. And then Ed came along and brought this gravitas to it. And I
mm,
love the contribution Mary's made, Ed's made, all of the people you mentioned, Mike, the whole crowd. We need to make sure that we amplify the voices of even the attempts at goodness, because right now the best of humanity is still in front of us. The
mm,
best of our future is still ahead of us. We have a series of challenges before us, but this, like everything else, I remind people, is like Valley Forge during the revolution.
yeah.
This is the moment when traitors are seen. Remember, Benedict
Mm,
Arnold came out of Valley Forge. Remember those things. Remember that these are the moments where true patriotism shines. And so, this is a time when we recognize that it's time to make sure that we're actually strengthening and encouraging the people who are out there in the bitter cold, fighting against all the odds, right? This is
right.
that moment, because without Valley Forge, we don't have patriots and we don't have traitors. And it's time for us to celebrate the patriots. And I'm grateful that you're doing that. And I'm
Mm,
excited that your show is doing that. The people you're hosting are fabulous. The message you have is fabulous. And I think, the metaphor holds. This is Valley Forge. We've got a
right.
lot of fights still in front of us. And that's
Right.
what we're going to do.
It's not over yet, guys, unfortunately. But listen, it's a bitter pill to swallow, but the truth shall set you free. Dr. David Martin, thank you so much for those bold truths today. You did not disappoint, and we're gonna get you. I was so excited for this interview. You're awesome. Come back again, and yeah, let's go. We got a lot
You
of
bet.
work to do, guys. All right. So you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being with us today. Please remember our sponsors. We will be back tomorrow to do it all again right here on the Shannon Joy Show.